She was humiliated for being short, for her slender frame, for the shoes that looked like they were picked up from a thrift store charity bin, and for the color of her skin. They called her the janitor's little sister, a cosplay fighter, a walking kettlebell, until, in just one round, she landed a textbook-perfect uppercut, and the 80-kilogram man collapsed like a tree chopped down, leaving the entire gym silent as a funeral with no mourners. Her name is Danica Rivers, alias the Viper, and that punch was her way of reminding the world, never judge a black woman by her size and appearance. This is Danica Rivers, a young black girl, her dark brown eyes hidden beneath her hair, tied neatly in a low bun. She wears a faded white t-shirt, the hem torn lightly on both sides. Her old boxing shorts hang a size too large for her slender body, loosely secured around her waist with a fraying drawstring. Her sneakers, if they ever had color, now only show cracks and emit a soft squeak every time she steps onto the shiny wooden floor. She carries an old brown canvas bag, its strap frayed at the edges, some stitches coming undone in spots, but her grip on the strap is firm, unwavering. Every step she takes is sure, as if she's walking towards something familiar, not lost. Ironcliff is a place with two faces. The front is a social media paradise. Full-length mirrors from floor to ceiling, bright fluorescent lights, EDM music, blasting just enough to make everyone feel like they're the main character in a fitness vlog. Here, rich kids, models, and influencers sweat it out for a perfect 3-second clip with the right filter. They wear Nike, Gymshark, carrying custom protein bottles with their names, and smartphones with tripods as battle gear. But in the back, where the ring is separated by frosted glass, is another world, where real fighters trade blood, bone, and time for a passion that isn't broadcasted. They don't wear designer labels. They don't shoot videos. They don't smile much. They punch, train, fall, get up, and punch again. Danica, with her petite frame, fresh face without makeup, and worn-out gloves loosely tied to her bag strap, stands out like a misplaced puzzle piece in this scene. People around her glance past without stopping to look. They don't see a fighter. They see a normal girl, too small, too insignificant, and because of that, no one bothers to pay attention. The gym is loud but not chaotic. A model is live-streaming her plank on a rubber mat. A group of rich kids are posing by the ab crunch machine, and a few trainers are adjusting their clients' poses for the one-and-done shot. And Danica? She moves slowly, quietly, as if the world around her has nothing to do with her. Her eyes quickly scan each corner of the room, not searching for anyone but to map out the space. Like a warrior stepping into the enemy's den, concealing all emotion. Her gaze, deep, sharp, but discreet, is like a blade hidden in an old leather sheath. She doesn't take a deep breath to calm herself because she's not afraid, but people won't see that. They'll only see a black girl in old sneakers with a cool, almost indifferent look in her eyes. In a place where arrogance is cast in mirrors, lights, and six-pack abs, was there room for someone like Danica Rivers? Yes, but not the room they had planned for her. And just as Danica had predicted in silence, the atmosphere around her began to shift. Not because anyone recognized something special, but because her presence hit the most sensitive nerve of this place, the pride of those who had never truly fought. At the polished front desk under the bright LED lights, Chase Monroe stood, head bent over the trial sign-up sheet. His face was square, his sun-kissed skin even, jawline sharp as a blade, and his hair slicked back with gel, not a strand out of place. His cliffside elite tank top clung tightly to his. Chest, revealing biceps larger than necessary. Clearly a gym-goer living for the mirror, not the ring. Next to Chase was Brittany Sloan, a TikTok sensation known for her perfect squat form tutorials set to remixed music, and a series of clips flaunting her body in pastel-colored workout gear. At that moment, she frowned, holding her phone close to her face, muttering, "Ugh, the lighting today is weird. No filter can fix my leg skin color. I don't know if the camera was set to HDR yesterday or if the lighting today just sucks." Both of them were too engrossed in their little world until Danica walked up. She placed her old canvas bag down at her side, slowly, then spoke in a soft but clear voice. "Can I sign up for a sparring session?" 1 second. 2 seconds. The air seemed to compress, as if someone had mistakenly hit a wrong note on a piano playing chill music. Chase lifted his head, his pale blue eyes sliding from her face down to her worn-out shoes, up to the loosely tied gloves, and then stopping at her baggy shorts. He raised an eyebrow, trying to mask his surprise with a slight smirk, but it wasn't hidden. "Sparring?" he said slowly, as if she had just said a word he didn't understand. "You mean stepping into the ring? With a real person? This isn't a morning cardio class, you know." Brittany burst out laughing, as if she had just heard an outdated joke. She didn't even bother to turn around to look at Danica. She just pulled her workout top tighter and said loudly, "Girl, do you think this is a Zumba class?" Brittany's voice was sharp, filled with the kind of confidence that comes from someone who's never been denied anything in her life. Her blonde ponytail swayed with every mocking nod she made. Danica didn't answer. She just stood there, shoulders straight, her gaze fixed on Chase, with no trace of discomfort. And it was that silence that made Brittany even more irritated. "Sparring," Brittany repeated, almost to make sure everyone around heard it. "You mean real fighting? In those worn-out shoes? Sweetie, here we train punches, not shoot documentaries about crazy clubs." Chase chuckled, but quickly regained his professional demeanor, pretending as if he hadn't just judged her. He grabbed a pen, flipped through the list, and said, "Have you trained anywhere before? Anyone to vouch for your skills? We don't want any newbies getting hurt." Every word was coated in a thin layer of politeness, but underneath, the blade of disdain was sharp. Chase was doing exactly what the system had taught him, judging others by their shoes, gloves, and faces. Behind the counter, a few members wearing Cliffside Elite boxing shirts, the elite members of the gym, started to turn around. Some of them glanced at Danica from head to toe, others whispered quietly. A muscular guy walked up, holding a neon protein bottle, muttering, "She looks so fresh-faced, and now she wants to spar. Drama's coming." A girl in tight workout clothes, with a rose tattoo on her shoulder, pretended to scroll through her phone, but never took her eyes off Danica. Each stare was another nail in the wall of prejudice. Danica still didn't speak. She just stood there, back straight, gaze unwavering. Around her, the Bluetooth speaker played slow hip-hop beats, the clink of weights hitting the floor, the heavy breathing of someone holding a plank. But all of it began to fade away as her presence, quiet as it was, began to disrupt. Chase was about to say something else, perhaps a polite refusal, or a way to dismiss her like he did with other novices. But then a loud laugh suddenly rang out from the sparring area behind. "Sparring? Did I hear that right, or is someone looking for a challenge?" That line was like a signal for a storm about to hit. From the shadow of the hanging punching bags, Jackson Creed stepped forward, and that's when the real stage opened up. The laughter shot through the thick air of prejudice, piercing the heart of an afternoon that had been sinking into dull monotony. From the back of the training area, amidst the tattered punching bags and dim, smoke-colored light, a figure emerged. Jackson Creed, 26 years old, 1.80 meters tall, 80 kilograms of lean muscle, walked toward the front desk as though the stage had just called his name. The fluorescent lights touched his glistening brown skin, shining from the body shimmer oil he'd applied before training, reflecting like aluminum foil. His hair was perfectly combed back, every strand in place as though a devoted stylist had set it. His red and black Viper X limited edition boxing gloves were casually draped over his shoulders. On his tank top, the bold words read, "Train, taunt, teach," a slogan he'd come up with himself, embodying the three things Jackson believed he excelled at: training, taunting, and teaching those beneath him. "Sparring, huh?" he repeated, his voice carrying like a TV host. "With her? Are you kidding me? How much does she weigh? 50 kilos when wet, maybe? If I breathe too hard, she'll snap her neck." The crowd burst into laughter, louder and deeper this time, as if they had found a new source of entertainment. A trainee high-fived his buddy. "Got content for tonight, man." Jackson slowed his pace, moving closer to Danica, passing by her as though she were just a newly delivered punching bag. His eyes never left her worn-out shoes. His lips curled into a smile, as if all he needed was a slow-motion camera to capture that smile for TikTok. But he didn't stop there. "You actually here to box?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. "Who do you think you are? Michelle Rodriguez's stunt double? That bag of yours is bigger than you are." Laughter erupted from the group wearing Cliffside Elite workout gear, the gym's elite clique known for three things: money, followers, and arrogance. A muscular man in neon yellow joggers joked, "Yo, Jax, go easy on her, man. She's got a kindergarten class to clean up after this." A platinum-haired girl with a nose ring nudged Brittany's elbow. "Imagine, if that skirt rips a little more, we'll see her boxer shorts. Thrift store trend, huh?" No one stopped to ask why they were humiliating a girl just because she dared to step in. In their minds, Danica wasn't an opponent. She was a prop. The side act in the main show titled, "Jackson Creed Teaches the Newbie a Lesson." Jackson turned back to face the crowd, raising his arms like a host directing the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we have a special feature. Minnie Mo is stepping into the ring to try her luck with me, Jackson Creed, the king of Ironcliff." Applause. Whistles. Phones started to rise. Some had already begun live streaming. A trainer murmured to his assistant, "Here we go with that kid's game again. If Jax hits hard enough, she'll fly off the mat." The assistant just shrugged. She might tap out early. People like this usually run away in the first 30 seconds. But Danica still didn't say a word. She looked at Jackson as if she were solving a simple equation, her gaze nothing but cold silence. No hostility, no reaction, just measurement. She was reading him, and that, exactly that, was what started to make Jackson uneasy. A villain doesn't see themselves as one. He believes he's strong, right, worthy of admiration. But what makes someone like Jackson the most uncomfortable isn't failure. It's being ignored. "Hey, why are you so quiet?" he asked, now genuinely frowning. "Scared to speak up?" Danica tilted her head slightly. Her voice was light, almost polite. "Are you ready for a round?" This time, the crowd didn't laugh. They froze. Not out of respect, but shock. A small black girl, raggedly dressed, looking directly at the guy who weighed almost twice her size and challenging him. A rare moment of silence. Then, "Damn, this girl's crazy. Who's recording? This one's gonna hit 1,000,000 views. She's doing this voluntarily, just so you know. No one's forcing her." Jackson turned to Chase, raising an eyebrow. "Sign her up, 1 round, 3 minutes. Just for fun." Chase nodded, though his lips twitched. Not because he was afraid of Danica, but because something felt off. Her eyes, her stance. It made it hard to breathe. Danica, however, only bent down to tie her shoes, worn but still sturdy. She pulled her gloves on, tightening them. No more words. She had stepped into her role. Not the newbie, not the bait, but the real fighter. The air in the room, which had just been stirred by loud laughter, was suddenly cut through by a light, effortless sentence, one with more power than any punch. Danica didn't raise her voice, nor did she step back. Her gaze remained as calm as if she were asking to borrow a pen. "Are you ready for a round with me?" A simple question. Short, director, no drama, no arrogance, and perhaps it was that overwhelming calmness that left the entire gym unsure of how to react, until they laughed even harder. They laughed as if they had just heard the funniest thing of the week, if not the month. A young man with a buzz cut, wearing a bright orange Nike gym bag, yelled, "Jax, go easy on her. She's got to go back and mop the floors at the kindergarten." The girl wearing Beats headphones, squatting with a barbell, removed one earphone just to laugh. Good grief. Did she think this was a charity interview? Another guy, covered in tattoos but with a beer belly, squinted as if filming a TikTok. "Hey, anyone called her family? The mat's gonna be full of blood in a minute." And in less than a minute, the contempt spread like mold through the air. Whispers, furtive glances, and suppressed giggles, all converging into a silent storm that crashed down on Danica. As for Jackson, it was as though he had been handed a microphone and the spotlight, so he stretched, cracked his neck theatrically, and threw in an exaggerated snap. "I'm always ready," he said, clapping his hands together as if warming up for a live stream session. "But the real question is, are you ready to be the highlight?" His voice echoed through the room, and as usual he was playing to the audience more than to his opponent. He didn't see Danica as an equal competitor. She was just a warm-up act for his performance, where he was the star. Brittany, now fully abandoning her phone, laughed uncontrollably, pointing at Danica's cracked shoes. "What's that she's wearing? Workout shoes or market slippers? I swear I've seen these in a Goodwill donation bin." Not stopping there, she began mimicking Danica's walk, small steps, light glides, intentionally making a squeaky sound like old rubber soles, causing her fitness group to laugh like a flock of seagulls discovering their prey for the day. The mocking remarks were no longer spontaneous reflexes. They began to feel like a collective execution ritual, a cruel form of behavior wrapped in the guise of a gym joke. Danica remained silent. No retort, no turning back. She didn't throw a single word back. She simply bent down, tightening her gloves. A simple action, but done with an almost strange precision. Like an artist tuning a cello before a performance. In a secluded corner near the punching bags, Marcus Reed, veteran coach and former Muay Thai fighter, narrowed his eyes as he watched. He didn't laugh, he didn't film. He just observed how Danica moved her wrists, how she adjusted the gloves with practiced ease. And then he studied her eyes. Not eyes filled with fear, but eyes that had learned how to lock away every emotion. He turned to whisper to a young trainer beside him. "She's not just anyone." "Why? She looks like she's about to cry?" "No," Marcus answered slowly. "She's about to teach this whole group a lesson." At the center of the mocking circle, Danica stood tall. Ahead was the ring. Behind her was an entire room waiting to see her fail. And in between, only her worn gloves, and something no one here had, the will to survive real failure. She didn't need to say anything more, because her eyes had already spoken for her. "Go ahead, keep laughing. Just one round, then you'll be silent forever." And just as the challenge, devoid of any dramatic flair, had been issued, the room slowly quieted, though not out of respect, but out of curiosity, eager to witness a comedy of their own making. Chase Monroe, the one holding the sparring sign-up sheet, initially considered ignoring it, as he had done with dozens of others who weren't worthy of stepping into the ring. But under the gaze of the crowd, the phones live streaming from 3 different angles, and Jackson's eyes that seemed ready to explode, he reluctantly took the pen and slowly wrote, Danica Rivers. 1 round, 3 minutes. Chase's handwriting was slightly slanted, the strokes firm as if he were writing out his own doubt. In the distance, Tony Masters, the head coach of Ironcliff, was wiping sweat from his neck with a thin white towel. Tony, over 50, with a face lined with wrinkles and a forehead weathered from years of shouting encouragement at his fighters, saw everything. He heard every word. But right now, he didn't intervene. Instead, he slowly approached Danica as she tied her gloves. His voice was rough and low, like the sound of embers burning. You just need to survive, you hear me? If you feel off, just wave to stop. No one will judge you. The words sounded kind, but beneath them was the taste of suspicion disguised as pity, a false protection for someone he considered weaker. Danica didn't answer. She didn't nod. She simply looked up, her dark eyes meeting Tony's, calm, neither resentful nor thankful. It was a gentle refusal of the kindness misplaced. Tony fell silent. The feeling inside him was like looking at a polished stone statue, not knowing if it contained fire inside or if it was just a cold rock. She stepped onto the mat. The worn-out soles of her sneakers made a faint squeak on the freshly mopped rubber floor. She bent down to check her straps, then gently pressed her thumb on the part of the gloves where the protective cover had worn away. The leather darkened, softened from sweat, worn from time. It may have been old, but it wasn't torn. Just like her. The crowd began to gather around the ring. Some climbed onto the wooden platform to film from above. Phones with mini ring lights were raised. The noisy chatter returned, but this time it was the noise of waiting for blood, not cheering. Across from the ring, Jackson Creed was raising his hand to the crowd as if preparing for a performance in an MMA show. He cracked his neck, stretched his shoulders, and lightly kicked at the air to warm up. His red-black gloves were already on. His eyes sparkled like they were charged by the laughter surrounding him. "Miss Rivers," he called, deliberately mispronouncing her name as though mocking. "Want me to pick some background music? Or would you prefer the sound of an alarm clock so you know when to wake up after the first punch?" The crowd clapped. Someone yelled, "Jax, let her go home for some porridge." Some even started placing playful bets over their phones. 30 seconds, no more. I'll bet $10. No, I'm saying 60 seconds. She seems tough. Danica stood straight in the corner of the mat. Her arms hung loosely at her sides, not in a fighting stance yet, but not relaxed, like someone who didn't know what was coming. She scanned the room, not to search for anyone, but as if she were sensing the space itself. This floor, this air, the way everyone was laughing and recording. She had seen it before, not in a gym, but in a ring in the South Bronx where she had stood at 18, with a bloodied knee and a heart as hard as steel. She knew what they were thinking. They thought this was a joke. They thought she would quit after the first punch. They thought she was here to be the backdrop for Jackson's highlight reel. They were wrong. Marcus, still standing in the back, arms crossed, quietly nodded, almost whispering to himself, "Just 3 minutes is enough to change everything here." The bell hadn't rung. The fight hadn't started, but the balance had already begun to shift. And when Danica stepped fully into the ring, standing in the corner marked by silver-gray padding, the LED lights reflecting off her worn gloves, the wave of mockery finally broke loose like an unscripted comedy show. All around the ring, the crowd huddled together. Some climbed onto cardio machines for a better view, others stood on the bench press, and a few even dragged chairs from the locker room to watch the show. A redhead, clad in a full pink Lululemon set, was live streaming directly to TikTok, adding a big caption. "Watch this. Lightning fast knockout in 20 seconds. Cosplay boxer. Sheer fail fighter." She turned to face the camera, pointing at Danica. "Who needs Netflix when you have this gym?" She looks like the first one eliminated in a beta version of Street Fighter. Laughter erupted like popcorn popping. A muscular young man, but with a slightly round belly, yelled, "Send her back to yoga class. This is boxing, not an audition for Rocky IX, Widow's Revenge." Another guy, bald with a gold chain as thick as a rope around his neck, added, "Don't let the wind blow too hard. She might fly out of the ring." Some people didn't speak. They laughed with their eyes, the kind of sneering short smirks, as if they didn't even need to open their mouths to send the message. "You don't belong here." Danica remained still. She didn't wave her hand in greeting. She didn't adjust her hair. She didn't look at the camera. She just breathed slowly and evenly. In her mind, there were no spectators, no spotlight. No one but one thing: movement. In the corner of the room, Marcus Reed, veteran coach, former Muay Thai fighter, crossed his arms, leaning against a steel pole near the punching bags. His brow furrowed slightly, his eyes fixed on Danica's feet. They weren't stiff, nor were they trembling. They just slightly lifted at the toes, her big toe touching the floor in the same stance of a seasoned fighter. A young trainer standing nearby glanced at Marcus, asking quietly, "What's up, coach? She looks okay?" Marcus didn't turn, but his voice dropped slow and deliberate. "You're not looking close enough. She's calculating. And I'm not sure Jackson knows what he's just signed up for." In the ring, Jackson Creed now looked more like a circus tiger than a real fighter. He bounced in place, swinging his gloves through the air, the sound of whoosh, whoosh, dramatically following each punch, intentionally offering flashy combos. Bam, bam, punch, spin, knee. Someone drop the beat for me. I need a soundtrack for this highlight. Someone turned on a Bluetooth speaker. The trap bass boomed. Jackson raised both arms to the sky like a UFC fighter preparing to enter the title fight. The crowd cheered. Danica still hadn't moved. A model walking past the ring said loudly enough for her to hear, "Hey, someone should call the gym doctor. I bet we'll need an ambulance in a minute." A man, taking behind-the-scenes photos, aimed his lens at her face, muttering, "This is hard to shoot. She has no expression. Looks like a wax statue." And it was true. Danica's face was as still as stone. No anger, no fear, no tension. She looked as if she had lived through too many storms to care about the waves people made. In the back of the gym, where the lighting was dimmer, a group of real fighters, those who had stepped into the ring for real, were watching. They didn't cheer, they didn't live stream. One of them, a tall man with a goatee who'd had a few amateur matches, tilted his head. "Wait, do you guys see how she's stepping? The way she's standing, the hip pivot, who taught her that?" Another, older fighter slowly shook his head. "I don't know, but I've seen that stance before. In an amateur tournament up in the Northeast, there was a girl. She used that exact stance." In that moment, Jackson raised his hand for a final gesture. Danica adjusted her gloves. Marcus quietly closed his eyes. Tony Masters crossed his arms and sighed. Chase stood next to the timer. The bell was about to ring. And none of them, no one, knew that from the next second onward, this room would never be the same again. The laughter hadn't quite died down when the bell rang. Decisive, cold, like a clean cut that split the room in two, one side waiting for blood to spill, the other, the only one truly observing. Marcus Reed, dressed in a charcoal hoodie, arms crossed, eyes never leaving the ring, whispered as if speaking to himself, "Hold on, she's not defending like an amateur. That footwork, that's Muay Thai, and not the kind taught in 60-minute cardio classes." A young trainer, still chewing the last bit of a protein bar, glanced over and shrugged. Maybe it's luck. Who hasn't watched those how to dodge a punch videos on YouTube? Marcus didn't laugh. He didn't answer. He just shook his head lightly. No. She's been in the ring before. And not just once. At that moment in the ring, Jackson Creed lunged, just as expected. Fast, strong, but overly confident. He unleashed a standard three-punch combo. Left jab, right cross, jab again. A showy series to control the tempo, meant for someone weaker. But no one expected the opponent not to counter, not to step back, but to disappear from his reach. She slid left, turned her shoulder, then dropped her head in the exact trajectory of someone who had trained to dodge by instinct, not theory. Jackson's second punch sliced through the air like a machete cutting through water. Outside, some cheered, thinking he was about to land a hit, but then fell silent when they saw him miss. Again. Missed again. Danica didn't strike back, but she started to move, her steps smooth, nearly silent. Front foot leading, back foot planted. Hips dropped, left shoulder relaxed. Chin slightly tucked. The stance of someone who had once known what it felt like to stand alone amidst the referee's countdown. On the makeshift bleachers, Brittany frowned. What's she doing? Just dodging? Another girl laughed loudly. Is she ballet dancing? Or is she trying to drag out the game before she gets punched? Meanwhile, Jackson started getting frustrated. He continued punching, harder, faster, trying to corner her. But every time, just as his fist swung, Danica slid to the side like a gust of wind, quickly returning to the center with a technical hip rotation. Marcus nodded, his face tightening. Look at her feet, that's classic Muay Thai stance. She's leading him into a loop. What loop? The young trainer asked, his voice starting to get serious. The exhaustion loop. When your opponent is heavier, bigger, stronger, don't attack right away. Let him burn his energy until he's breathing through his mouth. Then strike. Inside the ring, sweat started to bead on Jackson's forehead, his gaze wavering. Not the look of someone in control anymore, but the uncertainty of a man who keeps swinging but can't land a hit, wondering, who am I fighting? Danica still hadn't thrown a punch. But the only one truly watching this match, Marcus, understood that was the strategy. No need for noise. Let the opponent get lost in the maze he'd created himself. But the others hadn't caught on. They only saw Jackson having a little trouble. One of the Cliffside elite group chuckled sharply. Talk about luck. Wait until Jax breaks her neck and we'll see how she dodges then. Another model, still live streaming, kept her face completely calm. Probably just a delay, the highlights coming in 10, 9. No one realized the countdown was running out of time. At that moment, Danica moved to Jackson's left, her first change in direction. That small shift made Jackson hesitate for a moment. He raised his gloves, but it was too late. His foot planted wrong. His hips were misaligned. His force was off. He missed again. Marcus furrowed his brow, speaking louder than he had all night. He's losing his pivot. She's making him open up his angle. The young trainer still didn't understand. What does that mean? Marcus turned to him, his eyes lighting up. It means just one hook, at the right moment, and that mountain will fall. And the only thing left now, the only missing piece, was timing. And just as Marcus predicted, after a few rounds of retreating, Danica began to change direction. She didn't retreat anymore. She didn't dodge completely like before. Instead, on Jackson's seventh attack, a powerful right cross, Danica merely tilted her head by a few centimeters, just enough for the punch to slide past her cheek, leaving no mark. But this time, instead of sliding backward as usual, she held her ground, her eyes locked on his left chest. Not his eyes, not his hands. She was reading the body's driving force, the starting point of every real punch. Jackson didn't realize. He only saw his opponent dodging less, and mistakenly assumed he was successfully cornering her. "Here it comes," he roared, launching a 1-2-3 combo, jab, cross, uppercut. Each punch was crude, powerful, but lacked coordination. Danica didn't strike back. She didn't need to. She slid left, then immediately pressed her right heel to the floor to rotate, forcing Jackson to turn with her. And for the third time in less than 2 minutes, his punch hit empty space. At the edge of the ring, an amateur cameraman muttered, "Why is she just dodging? Isn't she gonna punch?" A woman with a Tiffany bracelet, continuously snapping photos, grumbled, "Such a letdown. I thought this fight was gonna get bloody. Now it's just like two people dancing around each other." Of course, they didn't know what they were watching. Meanwhile, Marcus, now closer to the ropes, his eyes sharp as a razor, murmured to himself as if calculating each move on an imaginary chessboard. "She's not defending, she's controlling." "Controlling what?" the young trainer asked, his voice lowering in seriousness. "Momentum, angle, breathing, reactions. She's making Jackson redundant." Indeed, if one looked closely, Jackson was beginning to lose his form. His gloves no longer returned to protect his chin. His right heel had started to lift off the floor, a dangerous mistake when throwing a hook. And his breathing, it was becoming audible. Danica still hadn't thrown a punch, but that silence was starting to be more terrifying than any counterattack. She moved around the ring in an arc, a classic boxing technique known as cutting angles, forcing Jackson to continually pivot to chase her. That consumed more energy than any punch. In the center of the ring, Jackson was now breathing through his mouth. He knew it, but his ego wouldn't let him stop. Not with dozens of phones recording, not with his friends cheering, not with Brittany laughing hysterically by the edge of the ring. "Don't you ever get tired of running?" he yelled. Danica didn't respond. She merely glanced very briefly at Jackson's left shoulder, and as Marcus had nodded, confirming, that was the cue. "Here comes the hip rotation," Marcus said softly, almost whispering to himself. "What?" the young trainer asked. "He's about to throw a nice punch but foolish." And just as predicted, Jackson crouched, rotated his left hip, loading power into a right hook, a near-perfect hook if his opponent stood still. But Danica didn't stand still. She read that hip rotation the moment his shoulder shifted. Just before Jackson's arm could swing out, she rotated on her left heel, tilted her body, and slid one step to the side, perfectly executing a slip and counter. She didn't strike. Not yet. Jackson, off balance, faltered for a second, losing his footing, and in that moment Marcus closed his eyes. It's over now. Because for real fighters, the moment of finishing doesn't lie in the punch. It lies in the angle. And Danica only needed one angle to do it. Outside the ring, the crowd started to realize something was wrong. A person live streaming shouted, "She hasn't thrown a punch, but that guy, he looks like he's about to fall." Another person began to stop recording. The story was no longer funny. It was no longer clear who should be worried. And in the center of it all, Danica Rivers remained silent. Half of the first round had passed. But the real game had only just begun. The atmosphere in the room began to shift. No longer excitement, but a deafening silence of doubt. It was as if the entire room suddenly realized they weren't watching a comedy show, but witnessing something much more serious, something more dangerous. Jackson Creed, the self-proclaimed gym champion, the man who had knocked out 3 people in 1 round, was now sweating like he had just run 6 miles, not fighting a cosplay boxer. His breathing grew rapid, rough, and loud. His punches started slowing down, and worse, he began swinging harder and faster, as if trying to reclaim his honor, not controlling the fight anymore. "Stand still and try to hit me," Jackson yelled, his voice louder than the trap music blasting through the speakers, more like a man losing control than a leader. His face was flushed, not just from exertion, but from the confusion that was turning into rage. This was no longer a fight. It was a one-sided chase that he didn't know how to stop without losing face. Outside the ring, Brittany Sloan, who had previously live-streamed mocking Danica, had turned off her phone. She gripped it tightly, her brow furrowing. "Hey, is Jackson losing his edge?" Another girl, confused, asked, "Why isn't she hitting? Is she scared?" No, Danica wasn't scared. She was waiting for the right moment. Marcus stood still, his eyes following every step Danica made, nodding lightly when he saw what no one else in the room had realized. Danica had begun to change her movement trajectory. Before, she moved in arcs. Now, she was shrinking the radius. She was forcing Jackson, not with power, but with angle. This technique is called cutting the ring. Only those who fought professionally have the skill to do this unnoticed, and Danica was doing it in silence. Jackson didn't understand what was happening. He continued throwing jabs, missed, cross, missed, right hook, off balance. And each time, Danica not only dodged, but adjusted her steps to place herself closer to his front right angle. At that moment, Marcus barely pursed his lips. She's opening the right angle, making him think he's still in control. "And then what?" the young trainer whispered. "Then, she'll block him with a counter to the ribs. If she's precise, just 1 hit will be enough." Outside the ring, the laughter stopped entirely. Only the sound of gloves hitting the air and Danica's footsteps remained, light but steady, like the cold heartbeat of someone no longer fighting to prove anything, but because it's just a habit of combat. A guy standing by the ropes, who earlier had bet she'd lose in 30 seconds, now whispered, "I don't get it. She doesn't look like she's good." But a middle-aged woman sitting near the cycling machines exclaimed, "She's not hitting, but that guy's about to fall." In that moment, Jackson stopped, his first time halting. His chin dropped slightly. His eyes searched Danica's face, as if hoping to find some answer in her gaze, but all he saw was a quiet wall. "Who are you?" he blurted out, as if waking up from a false dream. Danica didn't answer. She just took a half-step back, but not to defend, but to prepare for something only someone experienced would recognize. Marcus held his breath. Now, this is when it really begins. And in that moment, when the mockery gave way to confusion and arrogance was replaced with doubt, the ring was no longer a place of entertainment. It became a mirror reflecting the arrogance being stripped bare. Jackson's lingering question still echoed in the air. "Who are you?" But Danica didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because just a few seconds later, the answer revealed itself, not through words, but through force. Jackson tightened his gloves. He was too angry to think, too tired to maintain his technique, and too bruised in his pride to back down. He gritted his teeth, growling like an injured animal, and threw a right hook with everything left in him, A wild, wide punch completely out of control. He was betting everything on that punch. But Danica, she had just been waiting for this moment. And as Jackson rotated his hips, stepping with his lead foot and opening his left shoulder to throw the punch, it was then that his chest and liver were completely exposed. A fatal mistake for any professional fighter. Danica rotated on her left heel, twisted her hips, while dropping her right shoulder, positioning herself perfectly for the strike. Her whole body coiled in an instant, like a tightly wound spring, then exploded in a clean, perfect left hook, as cold and precise as a firing squad. The punch came diagonally, cutting into his liver just below the 9th rib, a textbook liver hook, the punch known as the hit that stops the heart without even touching it. The sound wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive like in movies. It wasn't sharp like gunfire. It was heavy, deep, a dull thud like a hammer hitting wet wood. The kind of sound only those close to the ring could truly understand. And then, Jackson Creed stood still for a moment, as if he couldn't believe what had just happened. His mouth opened to gasp for air, but no air could enter his lungs. He raised his hand, not to protect himself, but as if trying to grab something slipping beyond his reach. Control. Then he collapsed, not falling backward, not like a soldier hit by a bullet. He bent, dropped to his knees, and then fully crumpled, clutching his right side, mouth agape, his skin paling in just a few seconds. The ring fell into absolute silence. No cheers, no clapping. Just the faint wheezing of Jackson, each breath sounding like a knife scraping across his chest. His face turned pale, his eyes wide with a hint of panic, as if he had just seen his own arrogant ego shattered. Danica didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply took a step back, lowered her gloves, took a deep breath, and stood still. Her face unchanged, no emotion. But the light reflected on the faint scar under her chin, the scar that everyone once mocked, now the only sign left of what they could never understand. In the corner of the ring, a coach jumped from his seat, quickly climbing over the ropes, rushing to Jackson's side. "Don't let anyone touch him. Check his breathing first. His liver. That's definitely a clean liver hook." A few fitness models stood frozen. Some raised their hands to their mouths. Others lowered their phones, their faces pale. Brittany stood still, like stone, lips pressed tightly, her eyes locked on Danica as if, for the first time, she was truly seeing her. From the stands, Marcus whispered, "Perfect." A young trainer turned to him. "Oh my God, that punch." Marcus nodded. "Textbook liver hook. No mistakes. Clean, fast, no wasted power. That's not a punch from an amateur." And perhaps the scariest thing wasn't the punch. It was the way Danica walked away from it, as if she had never touched anyone. No triumph, no mockery, not a word. She simply waited for the referee to signal the end, then gently removed her gloves, revealing the layers of tape underneath, wet with sweat, but blood-free. The gym remained in utter silence. No one clapped. No one said anything. Because sometimes a single punch can be quieter than all the arguments. And silence, it was the verdict. In the dead silence of the gym, where Jackson's labored breaths still reverberated against the walls, the main door suddenly swung open. A soft breeze swept in from the outside, carrying the scent of street dust and the distant sounds of Brooklyn's streets in the late afternoon. And in the doorway, a familiar figure to the New York boxing scene appeared, quiet but carrying its own gravitational pull. Coach Michael Harper. The legendary trainer, over 60, with graying hair, a body built like bricks and years of hard work, wore an old leather jacket, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the room leisurely, as if he had sensed the atmosphere from the street outside. His gaze stopped at the ring. Jackson was still writhing, his lips turning purple, clutching his liver. Danica stood by the ropes, just finishing removing her last layer of hand wraps, beads of sweat clinging to her jawline. And then Coach Harper burst into laughter. A loud, raw, wild laugh, like stones crashing together, making the whole room tremble in a beat. Ha 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 ha. I knew it. Only you could land a liver hook like that. Danica Rivers, the Viper, Northeast lightweight champion for 3 years running. Those words rang out like a bell tolling in a church, tearing apart the illusions of the entire room. All eyes turned toward him. And then, like a chain reaction, each face paled, turning white, as if they had just seen a soul rise from the grave. Brittany Sloane's eyes widened, her lips trembling. What? What did you just say? Chase, the guy who had sized her up from head to toe when she asked to spar, now looked as if he had been punched in the chest. No way. Danica Rivers. Viper? Her? A guy from the Cliffside Elite group froze mid-livestream, lowering his phone, the screen still showing. Jackson KO incoming. No one moved. No one breathed deeply. Coach Harper walked toward the ring, his eyes still on Danica, half smiling, half sighing. I trained her for 2 years. Hands lightning fast, head colder than steel. That hook, her signature. I've seen it knock out 4 people in under 20 seconds. And then he turned to the crowd, his voice dropping low, booming through the room like a final counterattack. You laughed at her. You insulted her, called her a cosplay boxer, a janitor's sister. You thought you were clever live-streaming a lost girl getting schooled by Jackson? But you just mocked a real champion, someone who stood in rings in Newark, Philly, Queens, and never once went down. No one in the room dared to speak. A female trainer whispered to the person next to her, as if afraid Danica might hear. I remember. I saw her name on a women's bracket back in 2020. But then she just disappeared. Coach Harper nodded. She disappeared because of a knee injury. Everyone thought she was retiring. But today, looks like she just wanted to remind you all that. Sometimes, the thing you underestimate the most is the last thing you want to face. All the phones were now lowered. All the smiles vanished. The shame became the air. It seeped into every lung, every muscle, every reddened eye from embarrassment. In the ring, Danica only glanced at Harper, briefly, like a greeting, and then turned away. No arrogance, no shyness, just a warrior who had completed her part. And she left the room with one name only, Danica Viper Rivers, a name no one would dare speak with laughter again. Coach Harper's words, decisive, no shouting, still echoed like the final verdict. A verbal hook aimed directly at the inflated egos dressed in designer labels and virtual followers. He stood in the middle of the empty floor, arms uncrossed, shoulders straight, eyes scanning each face, each gaze searching for a way to avoid the truth. You laughed at her. Just because she's small, black, wearing old clothes, and doesn't have followers on social media. You called her a joke, a cosplay boxer, a janitor's sister, and her. His voice dropped, but was as sharp as a blade. She just taught you all a lesson in humility with a single punch. One punch. No one moved. Brittany Sloane, who had been the first to laugh out loud, now had her head lowered, her face pale, lipstick faded from trembling lips. Her hand still gripped her phone, but the screen had been off for a long time. Chase Monroe, the trainer who had mocked Danica with a dismissive glance, now stood still beside the front desk. His eyes were fixed on the registration book, where the name Danica Rivers still lay, like an indelible piece of evidence. And Tony Masters, the head coach who had patted her shoulder with pity and said, "Just survive, kid," was now standing against a column, his head lowered, hands clasped together. Not out of fear, but out of shame. "I let this happen," he whispered, "right in my own gym." Coach Harper wasn't paying attention to him. He looked at the Cliffside Elite group, those faces who had cheered when Jackson entered the ring, who had clapped when Danica was called a cosplay boxer, now standing withdrawn, like defeated souls with no need for a punch. "This isn't just about boxing," Coach Harper continued, his voice even, like reading an indictment. "This is about how you look at others, how you judge them by their worn shoes, old gloves, skin color, and silence. And Danica? She doesn't need to threaten anyone. She doesn't need to prove anything. She just does what none of you have learned to do, know when to stay silent, and when to strike." A young trainer, the one who had bet Danica would lose in 30 seconds, now stood by the edge of the ring, his mouth slightly open but no sound coming out. A platinum-haired model who had previously live-streamed mimicking Danica's walk was now deleting the video from her phone, her hands trembling. Marcus, the only one who had seen the truth from the beginning, remained silent. But his eyes showed a deep, unspoken respect. "I told her," Coach Harper said more quietly, almost like reminiscing, "that she could go further than anyone else in her weight class if she kept her head clear. And today, she didn't just keep her head, she kept her dignity." The room was heavy as lead. Each person in it was being reflected in a harsh mirror. Themselves, with their smug smiles, condescending tones, and dismissive looks at others based solely on appearance. They were the problem. And they couldn't blame anyone else. They couldn't say, "We didn't know," because they had laughed, they had live-streamed, they had gambled with someone else's dignity for sport. Danica was no longer in the ring. She had stepped down, slowly wrapping her hand wraps, each movement steady, like breathing. Not a word, not a glance at anyone. And that silence, once again, struck them harder than any punch. No need for applause, no need for apologies. She hadn't come here to be recognized. She had come to remind them that arrogance without skill is just an empty shell waiting to crack. In a room that had just experienced the collective collapse of pride, it was the silence that became the clearest voice. Danica Rivers said nothing. She simply leaned forward slightly, removing the last of her gloves, the worn leather stained with sweat, but still intact, just like her. With a neat motion, she pulled off the wraps, folded them carefully, and tucked them into her old canvas bag. No one spoke. No one asked. No one dared to apologize. Because they understood, none of them deserved an answer. She turned, walking past each one of them, the ones who had mocked, who had ridiculed, who had filmed, who had bet on her failure like a cheap amusement. Each step Danica took was another crack, widening in the mirror of self-satisfaction that filled the room. No one dared to stop her. No one dared to look her in the eye. Brittany Sloan, the one who had live-streamed mocking Danica, now only stared at the floor, her hands pale from gripping the phone that had been off for who knows how long. Chase Monroe stood motionless behind the front desk, his gaze fixed on the name Danica Rivers in the registration book, like an unerasable reminder of his hasty and arrogant judgment. Tony Masters stepped forward, about to speak, but Danica's gaze swept over him calmly, without resentment, without forgiveness, and he stopped, because he understood some lessons can only be accepted in silence. Danica walked past the cardio area. A few people were sitting there, those who had laughed earlier, now with their heads lowered or turned away. Every live stream camera now pointed downward, as if strangled. And then she stopped. right in front of a phone still recording. The screen clearly displayed, "Live, 246 viewers." The owner of the phone, a young man with a flushed face, was about to stop the video. But Danica raised her hand, gently, to signal him to keep it on. She looked straight into the camera. No anger, no pride. Just a cold calm, the kind of calm forged through pain that no one in the room had ever experienced. "I don't need anyone to remember my name. I just need them to remember one thing. Don't judge a girl by her size." Her voice wasn't loud. It wasn't challenging. But every word rang clear through every corner of the room, striking precisely where they had once thought unworthy of attention. The words weren't long. There was no need to explain. But they were the final blade, cutting through the mask that each person in the room had tried to hold on to. She turned, slinging her bag over her shoulder, walking through the door as if no one had ever stood in her way. And indeed, no one dared to stand in her way anymore. Behind her, Coach Harper stood still, arms crossed, his eyes no longer filled with pride, but with deep, respectful understanding. He didn't call her back, he didn't clap, he didn't say goodbye, because he knew some fighters don't need the ring to win. They win by walking away and leaving the room too ashamed to lift their heads. The crowd remained silent, as if they had just seen someone not only step out of the ring, but step out of their reach, beyond their judgment. Not the victor, but the survivor, the returnee, the one who made sure they'd never dare make that mistake again. As the gym door closed behind Danica, the world inside it would never be the same. But what no one in the gym expected was that that door would open into an earthquake on the outside. One of the phones still live streaming, the one Danica had stopped in front of to make her final statement, never turned off. And just a few hours later, the 2-minute and 43-second clip appeared across all platforms, from TikTok, Instagram Reels to Twitter Hex. No background music, no filter, no funny captions, just the truth. Raw, honest. Strong enough to make the entire social media world fall silent. In the clip it was clear, a small black girl, worn gloves, faded t-shirt, standing face-to-face with a tall gym fighter, fresh gloves, branded shirt. No one in the clip spoke up for her. The entire room laughed. Jackson advanced, throwing a barrage of punches, and she dodged every single one. No retaliation until the 98th second, a left hook to the liver. No screaming, no cheering. Just the sound of the body collapsing and the sudden silence of the whole room. Then, at the end of the clip, was the image of Danica standing before the camera, looking straight into the lens. "I don't need anyone to remember my name. I just need them to remember one thing. Don't judge a girl by her size." 48 hours later, the clip had over 7 million views. The comments flooded in. Jackson deserved that, full stop. She's not a fighter, she's a force of nature. This hit harder than any motivational reel I've seen all year. Who is she? I need to know more about the Viper. From true boxing fans to sports journalists, from feminist pages to underdog wins groups, everyone was sharing that clip. They didn't know exactly who she was, but they knew one thing. She did what thousands of people had wished they could do: stand up, stay silent, and win in a place full of prejudice. On the other side of Brooklyn, in a small third-floor apartment in Queens, Danica sat by the old window, a cup of black coffee in her hand. She didn't open her phone. No social media. She didn't care about views, shares, or hashtags. She only knew. Her left knee still ached, but for the first time in 3 years, it was no longer a symbol of limitation. It was the mark of a fight she had returned to. And at Iron Cliff Boxing and Performance, everything changed too. No need for signs, no need for internal meetings. After just one afternoon, the culture of the gym rewrote its own rules. No more giggles when a newcomer walked in with a canvas bag or worn-out shoes. No more coaches telling someone just survive because they didn't fit in the ring. No more calling small women lightweights as a joke. Because now, every time someone was about to speak, to laugh, to judge, their eyes would involuntarily glance at the mirror in front of them, and they would see Danica slipping Jackson's punch with a step as light as the wind, then delivering a hook as sharp as a blade that cut away arrogance. And they fell silent, not out of fear, but because they knew that just once, someone had taught them something that no one in the gym had dared say. Strength doesn't come from biceps, it comes from scars you can't see. Danica was no longer there, but her name, the Viper, still hung in the air with every jab, every shadow boxing, every glance from a newcomer walking through the door. One punch, just one, had sent the internet into a frenzy, and for those who once laughed, that punch still echoed on. The clip continued to spread, comments flooded in, and hashtags burned across platforms. The Viper, one punch truth, never judge, but Danica Rivers didn't read a single line. She was in the one place in the world where no one needed to know what she had just done. A small third-floor apartment on a quiet corner of Queens, where the walls still had a few chipped paint spots, and the old windowsill creaked every time the wind passed by. Danica sat there, wearing a loose gray t-shirt, hair in a low bun, her feet resting lightly on the worn wooden frame. In her hand was a cup of black coffee, no sugar, no cream, bitter but awakening. Each sip was a subtle reminder, I'm still here. I still have what matters most. Not fame, not glory, not the undefeated streak from years ago, but skill. And not just the skill to punch, but the skill to remain silent, to maintain dignity, to hold composure in a world that constantly tests patience with cheap laughter. She didn't turn on the TV. She didn't check the news. On the wooden shelf, her old gloves, now hung up. The left glove had a new scratch, the outer leather peeling where she had landed the liver hook on Jackson. No polish, no glass frame. But to her, it was the mark of something deeper than a win. That punch wasn't to teach Jackson a lesson. It was to remind herself, I'm still here. She lightly touched the scar under her chin. The scar that someone once mocked as the fall when cleaning floors. Number. It was from a sparring match when she was 19, elbowed in the ribs because she wasn't wearing face gear. One of those training sessions where she left with bandages around her head but came back the next morning. She had been through that and survived. So, yesterday at Ironcliff, when the whole room laughed, when the lights flashed on worn shoes and torn gloves, she didn't see injustice. She only saw an opportunity, a way to test. After all these years of silence, after the knee injury, after the night she woke up from dreams of a broken leg in round 3, did she still have what made her different? And now she knew she still did. No microphone, no stage, no title. She didn't need anyone to remember her name, because names are just sounds. She wanted them to remember the punch, the way the whole room went silent in an instant, and no one dared turn their back without seeing themselves in it. If anyone forgets, if, on another day, in another place, someone laughs again when they see a small girl, not looking like a fighter, step into the ring, Danica won't remind them with words. She'll remind them with a liver hook. Clean, precise, silent, like destiny. And then she took another sip of coffee, her eyes gazing out at the small street below the building. The sun was setting, casting golden light on the brick wall across the street, creating a long shadow like a scar across memory. A group of kids rode their bikes down the alley. A cat sat grooming itself on the windowsill of the apartment across. The city had no idea what had happened yesterday, but Ironcliff knew, and the internet would never forget. Danica Rivers, the Viper. No need to return to the ring. She had left her mark in history, silently but unerasable. A small black girl silently walked into the gym, mocked for her size, laughed at for her worn shoes, disrespected for her silence. But with one punch, she made the entire room and the entire internet fall silent. Danica Rivers didn't need titles. She didn't need a stage. She didn't need glory. She just needed them to remember one thing. Don't judge a person, especially a woman, by her appearance. So, what about you? Have you ever been judged wrongly just because you didn't look like what others expected you to be? Share your story in the comments, because maybe the world needs another liver hook from you. If you found this story thought-provoking, hit like, share this video with someone who's been judged wrongly, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories where silence knocks down arrogance. Because sometimes the hardest punch is the one that doesn't make a sound.